The Michigan Military and Veterans Hall of Honor is producing these videos to talk about inductees to the Hall of Honor. I am Jim Fossone, one of the board members. We are recording these short videos and hoping that you find the information interesting enough that you dig a little deeper and read about the detailed stories that we have on these inductees to the Michigan Military and Veterans Hall of Honor. Today, we're going to talk with former board member Paul Ryan, vice chair of the board, and he has an interesting story to help narrate the stories of these some of these inductees. Paul grew up in New York. He went to the University of Notre Dame on an ROTC program, did 5 years active duty with the Navy, and then did 25 years or so with the Naval Reserve, ultimately retiring with the rank of captain back in 2005. Paul, during that time, pursued a parallel civilian career in banking and estate planning, and is now retired. And along the way has found himself about in every veterans organization in Western Michigan. One of the ones I think he's maybe most proud of is his involvement with the Michigan Committee for Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve, more commonly known as the ESGR. But there's a wide variety of volunteer organizations that are better for the efforts of Paul Ryan. Paul, thank you for helping us out here on the Hall of Honor videos.
Sure, Jim, happy to do it.
Well, let's start with one of the inductees, Ralph Hauenstein. Ralph was born in Indiana, but joined the Army in 1935. Interestingly, in World War II, he was promoted to Chief of Intelligence for the European Theater of Operations under General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He's also had, after his military career, really a fantastic business career and a philanthropic career. So he's one of those guys that the more you learn, the more you're interested in all the things that he's done. Paul, tell us a little bit about Ralph and what you find so inspiring about his activities.
Well, I actually had the privilege of meeting Ralph once a few years ago. One of the many things that he had done after the war was establish at Grand Valley State University the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Leadership Studies. Great philanthropist in the Western Michigan area, very, very well known in both business and philanthropic circles. And as it turned out, I met him at a GVSU fundraiser in Florida, and he was well into his 90s at that time. And you talk about, even though his military career was relatively short, it was just, it was divided up into a couple of parts, as you had mentioned in the intro. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Reserve in the 1930s. Sort of got away from that in the later 30s, and then went back into the Army in World War II. So he didn't have very many years of military service, but meeting him at this fundraiser, I mean, the guy was ramrod straight, not an ounce of fat on him. It looked like he had just done the Army physical fitness test 5 minutes before he went out and got his cocktail. So a very imposing, impressive presence.
And that really gets you to one of those things that we often see, Paul, and that is, while many of us you retired from it, but many of us only served for a few years, it tends to impact or shape your whole life and your career. And did you get the sense it did with Ralph?
Oh, yeah. And he was very public about this in his writings. He was General Eisenhower's chief of intelligence during the war. So he reported directly to Eisenhower and was basically in charge of all the Allied intelligence efforts throughout the European theater. In 1945, as the war was drawing to a close, one of the missions that he went on, he spent almost all of the war in London, early portions of it in Iceland, and then the rest of it in London. But towards the end, he went on a mission into the continent when the Allies were looking for Nazi leadership, and Hitler hadn't committed suicide yet, and his trip to the continent caused him to see up close and personal the destruction that these totalitarian ideologies, visited upon European infrastructure people, just how terrible that was. And he dedicated his post-war career in large measure to ensuring that those kinds of totalitarian ideologies could no longer take hold really anywhere in the world. He was a close friend of President Gerald Ford. As it turns out, both Hauenstein and Ford were Grand Rapidians. Both played high school football, although on opposing teams. We all know that Jerry Ford, of course, went on to play for the University of Michigan, but it was that initial high school football rivalry that caused Ralph and Jerry Ford to become lifelong friends. Ralph became an advisor to a number of governmental bodies in the 70s and 80s. Later on in the 1990s, he was on a commission that helped to oversee the first truly democratic elections in Russia. As we look at Russia today, one might argue that 1996 election was the only truly democratic election held in Russia up to this point. He was a business leader. He owned a company food company that introduced goldfish crackers to the world. Andes mints, even before the war. There are people who, I hesitate to say they're natural born leaders, but they have the attributes of leadership. When he shortly after he got out of college, I think he was 27, 28 years old, he became the city editor for the Grand Rapids Herald newspaper, and was in charge of 16 different reporters for the paper at age 27. And that just continued on. He was a second lieutenant in 1941 when the war started. He came out 4 years later as a full colonel. The guy's abilities in a variety of endeavors were really astounding, and he's one of those guys that was compelled to give back. Great philanthropic activities throughout West Michigan in a wide variety of endeavors.
And it really seems that some of those experiences you mentioned when he got to the continent in World War II and saw the devastation that had occurred really impacted him the rest of his life, and his philanthropy and the work that he was doing. It really, that part of his service really rang through the rest of his life, didn't it?
Oh yeah, it really informed that. He dedicated his life, as he prospered as a business leader. He dedicated his life to improving the lives of people in healthcare, in education, in leadership, training or encouraging future leaders to not go down that fascist totalitarian path, and really strengthen democratic institutions, not just in the United States through the U.S. government, but around the world.
Well, we'd encourage everybody to dig a little deeper, learn more about Ralph Hauenstein, who had an incredible life. His efforts in business and philanthropy, formed by his military service, is one of the reasons he's in the Hall of Honor. And I think if you do a little more reading, you're going to be pretty amazed about this fellow citizen of this great state.